Melbourne, 1946. Victory parades for our returned servicemen, and a personal triumph for Australia's best-known soldier, Sir Thomas Blaney. Much of the pre-war charm of the place was still evident, but by the late 40s, Melbourne was very much a city on the move. Its population entering a period of sustained growth and rapid change. But some things remained constant. According to VFL Secretary Great Mccarthy, pictured here in the bowler hat with Dr. McClellan and other league officials, football in Melbourne had become a gigantic industry. The VFL had managed to survive both world wars without interruption. Once football was restored to the MCG after its occupation by the armed forces, the fans turned out again in huge numbers. It was the beginning of a new era, confirming the VFL's status as Australia's most popular football competition. In football terms, the biggest surprise of the first post-war season was the poor showing by the previous year's league finalists. Neither of the 1945 grand final combatants, Carlton and South Melbourne, were in contention. Instead, it was the Bombers who became the first team to play jet-age football and set the standard for others. The Dons won 15 of their 19 home and away games in 1946. And entered the grand final as warm premiership favourites. Their opponents, Melbourne, the Demons having won 12 of their last 13 games to qualify for the big one. Captains Norm Smith and Dick Reynolds tossed the coin. Champion Demon forward Fred Fanning, a surprise starter in the ruck, wins the first hit-out, and Melbourne heads into attack through Dockett. A marking contest between the two vice-captains, Mueller, number 12, and Riddell, number 21. Two fine marks, one by each team. Essendon's number 7 is champion rover Bill Hutchison. At this boundary throw-in, Smith, number 4, and his opponent Riddell are scouting. Riddell at fullback holds up another Demon move. The Dons' defence wins out again as Fanning, number 6, and Eckwood, number 32, contest. The ball spills, and Eckwood boots it out of mid-air, where it falls to Reynolds, who clears. After an even first half, an 11-goal Bomber blitz in the third quarter established a finals record still unequalled. The Demons' frustration is evident in this melee, which includes Bombers Riddell and Buttsworth, and Melbourne players Mueller, Rodder, Dullard, O'Rourke and Byfield. But the Dons could do no wrong. In this passage, Bomber centreman Pearson, number 20, twists and turns before kicking for goal, where Eckwood marks on a tight angle. His short pass misses the target, but Rawle, number 2, mops up and handballs to Hutchison, who kicks the easiest of goals. A comprehensive victory for Dick Reynolds' men. The Bombers kept at the forefront by continuously introducing new players, but didn't have things all their own way the following season. A resurgent Carlton team faced them in the grand final. Carlton's ace was Ern Henfrey, a surprising but inspired choice as captain, and a cool, clever centre-man. Match action. The Dons' Harper handballs to Bradley, who clears. Carlton's Howell wins the boundary tap. Williams' number 12 gathers, and his low skimming pass finds Baird, number 25. His kick lands in the square, where Turner snaps the first goal of the match. Norm MacDonald clears for Essendon, and Brittingham marks strongly over Deacon. But his kick is astray, one of several key misses. But Dick Reynolds makes no mistake with this clever interception and bouncing run into goal, pursued in vain by Baird of Carlton. And here's another major for the Dons, as Bill Hutchison grabs the ball from the pack and threads through a good angled goal. From Fred Davies' tap, the ball ends up with Henfrey, who dodges his own teammates and finds winger Doug Williams. Williams recovers well after slipping, with assistance from Henfrey shepherding. Fullback Cess Riddell clears on the left foot. Centre half-back Wally Butchworth also gets a kick away. Howell and Bushby contest another boundary throw-in, and Backman Brown clears for Carlton. A toe poke by Reynolds out of Bennett's hands is gathered by Hutchison, who snaps Essendon's fourth goal. Ivan Goodingham's mark and goal kept the Dons in front, but they continued to be wasteful in attack. In the final quarter, the Blues gradually pegged back Essendon's lead to sneak home by the narrowest of margins. The closest result in a grand final since 1903. Carlton fans were delirious, and the players and officials, including Henfrey, Bert Deacon and coach Perce Bentley, equally so. A coal strike the following year restricted train services, causing problems for many commuters. But a timely entrance for the first Holden, which rolled off the GMH assembly line at Fisherman's Bend. And trouble-free motoring for Dick Reynolds' Bombers, raging favourites once more to take the flag after their painful loss the previous season. The grand final was a rematch of 1946. Melbourne, under retiring coach Checker Hughes, now captained by Don Cordner. Essendon full forward Bill Brittingham, number 23, saw plenty of the ball in the 48 playoff, but he and his teammates again squandered numerous opportunities with wayward kicking. The Demons' desperate defence was also a contributing factor to the Dons' shocking inaccuracy. They finished with 7-27. Melbourne's Jack Mueller was inspirational, kicking 6 goals, and setting up this one for Craddock, number 6. But the game ended with scores level, the first tie ever in a grand final. A week later, the two sides faced each other again. The Dons were missing key players through injury, and the momentum had now firmly swung Melbourne's way. In a flying start to the game, Melbourne's Bickford marks. The ball is punched clear by McClure, but only as far as Dullard, who goals. Smith's left foot pass to Mueller is successful, while McMahon brings up Melbourne's third goal, much to the delight of Demon fans. Trying to lift his side, Reynolds dispossesses Deans of Melbourne and goals. But the Bombers were struggling. Hutchison's hand pass goes to Don Cordner, who clears. The Demons went on to win their 6th VFL flag, leading from start to finish. After successive grand final losses, Essendon earned another playoff chance the following year, Grand Final Day, 1949. Perfect conditions for football. A huge crowd, many fans crushed inside the boundary line. The Dons were opposed to Carlton, their conquerors in 47, captained again by Ern Henfrey. Dick Reynolds leading his side into its 4th consecutive grand final. At the opening bounce, Bomber ruckman Bluey McClure injures his knee. A nice pass to Don forward Ted LaHaye, number 9. From his kick, Bill Hutchison gathers and brings up the team's first goal. From this boundary throw-in, Carlton skipper Henfrey breaks clear, but goes down in a tremendous sandwich, greatly nullifying his influence on the game. Scores were close, and the tackling fierce throughout the first quarter. But this great mark and goal by Chuka Howell kept the Blues well in contention. Pacey Essendon backman Norm MacDonald clears, and a good bit of team play by winger Bradley for the Dons. After half-time, it was all Essendon. MacDonald passes to Jones. His long kick to the forward line ends up with Hutchison, who snaps at goal. The Bombers went on to win by a thumping 73 points. On the tennis court, Australian junior doubles champs Lou Hode and Ken Rosewall, talented newcomers destined for bigger things. Back at the MCG, a new flag challenger for the all-conquering Bombers. North Melbourne seeking its first flag. Its lineup including winger Keith McKenzie, later to coach North. Reynolds and North skipper Les Foot toss the coin. Essendon's McClure and North ruckman Thornton contest the opening bounce. Les Foot gathers the loose ball and kicks forward. Tough defender Ted Jarrett attacks towards the punt road end, but gets no further than Bluey McClure. Left foot clearing kick by North backman Pat Kelly. The 1950 Grand Final was also one of the first to be filmed in colour by former cyclist, entrepreneur and Essendon committee man Ted Waterford. Pictured here with Bomber legend John Coleman. Waterford's VFL film coverage of the late 40s and early 50s provides a unique visual record of this period, including access to the team's three-quarter time huddles. His friend, Doug Elliott, supplied the voiceover.
Here now is Essendon. There's skipper Reynolds receiving treatment. Les Gardner. Bluey McClure. He looks confident. See the V-side. There's John Coleman. That popular half-back flanker, Norm MacDonald. Bill Brittingham. Les Gardner again. Bert Harper. Jack Jones. McConnell in the rear. And here's Bill Snell's beautiful shiner. Just look at it. He receives commiseration from Jack McMurray Jr., Ace League umpire.
In a very physical and sometimes spiteful encounter, Essendon's class prevailed, and the Dons eventually cruised home by 38 points. Yet another try for Dick Reynolds' powerful team. By 1951, wartime restrictions had eased. The motor car and the Sunday drive were now a feature of Melbourne living. Commuters to Geelong in the 50s would have noted the new Shell refinery, set up to handle Australia's growing petrol needs. This was a huge boost to employment for the Corio Bay community. But it was the improved form of the local footy team which really put a spring into the step of the locals. The Cats, now based at Kardinia Park, had had a difficult few years re-establishing themselves after rejoining the competition in 1944. But under the astute handling of former champ Reg Hickey, Geelong was about to enter its greatest era. The Cats of the early 50s had pace and talent on every line. George Kinninan, Bernie Smith, the Geelong flyer Bob Davis, Bill McMaster, Russ Middlemas, Ron Hovey, Bruce Morrison, John Hyde, Nipper Tresize, and skipper Fred Flanagan. Geelong topped the ladder in 51 and had the top goal kicker and Brownlow medalist as well. Cat fans hoped for a bumper final series and would not have been disappointed with their team's performance in the second semi-final opposed to Collingwood. Flanagan tosses the coin with acting Magpie skipper Lou Richards. An impressive Collingwood bench: Jock McHale, Sid Coventry, Fons Kine, and reserves Frank Tuck and Skeeter Coghlan. For Geelong, Len Metherell in the hat next to Coach Hickey. Behind them, a sea of Cat supporters, eager for the action to start. Collingwood began the match brilliantly, but by three-quarter time, the speedy Cats had run the Magpies ragged. Cause for concern in the Woods huddle. The team already facing a 5-goal deficit. A much more relaxed mood in the Geelong camp. George Kinninan already had reason to smile and went on to boot 11 goals in his team's 82-point victory. Essendon edged out Collingwood by 2 points a week later to join Geelong in the 51 grand final, and actually led the confident Cats at half-time. But Geelong's third-quarter burst of 5 goals to Essendon's 2 points was the killer. Despite a last-quarter fight-back by the Dons, the Cats kicked again to run out 11-point winners. 1952. And plans for staging the Olympics in Melbourne at that time included redevelopment of Princes Park as the principal games venue. But for all the well-laid plans and the elegant drawings, it would be some years before the Blues' home ground received a facelift. Geelong's plans for back-to-back flags, though, were right on schedule. After an easy win against Collingwood in the second semi-final, the Cats were the hottest grand final favourites for many years. Fullback Morrison shakes hands with his Magpie opponent, Harvey Stevens, a future Footscray captain. Geelong's ability to attack from the fullback line held the team in good stead. Morrison was well supported by relief ruckman Norm Sharp, number 26, 51 Brownlow medalist Bernie Smith, the most attacking back pocket in the game. Best on ground back flanker Jeff Williams, number 21, in his first year with the club. And centre halfback John Hyde, number 16. Around the packs, Geelong also did well, with small men Peter Pianto feeding off a dominant ruck division. And Nipper Tresize strongly tackled here, but a multiple goal kicker on the day. Ganinen at full forward was also a handy target, kicking 5 goals. As in their second semi-encounter, the Cats more than doubled the Magpie score to take out the 52 flag. But the Woodsmen reversed the 52 grand final result by defeating Geelong in the 1953 grand final. And Magpie fans gathered in force at Victoria Park for the flag unfurling at the first home game in 1954. Fitzroy skipper Alan Ruthven introduces his team to Victoria's governor, Sir Dallas Brooks. Acting Magpie captain Neil Mann does likewise, accompanied by club president Sid Coventry. A proud moment for the Collingwood faithful. The Magpies began the 54 season in fine style and had no problems beating Fitzroy in this encounter. The Roy's number 2, George Coates, holds up one Collingwood attack. The Woods' Peter Lucas flies for a mark. This film segment was one of many VFL football items included in the local newsreel, the Australian Movie Toe News, throughout this period. Together with the rival Cinesound Review, the newsreels were still the principal source of football film coverage at this time. A welcome addition to the growing library of football films came from an unlikely source. The newly formed Melbourne Repertory Film Unit, a little-known cooperative enterprise with more than 100 members, in association with the ANFC. The unit's first completed film deals with the introduction of a small migrant boy named Ricky to our national game. He follows a group of local boys through Melbourne's inner suburbs. And finds himself at the mecca of football, the MCG, on preliminary final day. Inside, Ricky follows a man in a light overcoat and is transported, magically, to the players' rooms at Victoria Park. Commonplace now, this would have been one of the first films to record a league club's dressing room activity. Young Ricky is given a quick history lesson by the bloke he's followed, Collingwood champ Bill Toomey, who ironically did not play in this game.
His ready smile wins a friend, a player and hero to thousands of fans, who shows him around this typical Australian football club room. with its years of football tradition.
The MCG, meanwhile, is filling up quickly for Collingwood's clash with Geelong. As a non-profit group, the Melbourne Repertory Film Unit received generous support from a range of organisations and individuals. For this film, the unit was able to call on a number of professional cinematographers, including Cinesound cameraman Gordon Lloyd and the legendary Ross Wood. For them, the importance of being able to follow the ball during the match sequences was paramount. Collingwood's winger, Thorold Merritt, passes to his skipper Neil Mann. But little Ricky is missing all the action, until a kindly spectator comes to his rescue and wastes no time in pinning the Magpie colours on him. Ricky's saviour turns out to be former Magpie and football advisor to this film, Bruce Andrew. He would have been pleased with what he was witnessing. Collingwood's Des Healy contesting fiercely with Nipper Tresize. Geelong rover Peter Pianto. Smoke haze rises above the partially completed northern stand. The Woods held off strong challenges by Geelong in the final 2 quarters.
Players are individually matched in field position, and their individual tussle...
Number 27 for the Magpies is a young Murray Wiedemann. Marking strongly is rover Bill Jones.
The Australian people...
These two teams had played out some stirring duels in the early 50s, but their successes were about to be overshadowed by an even more formidable combination. Melbourne, 1955. 12 months prior to staging its biggest sporting event ever, the 16th Olympic Games. Its principal venue, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. With the addition of a new northern stand, the MCG would soon cater for an extra 40,000 patrons. Work on the stand and resurfacing of the famous turf proceeded at a steady rate, to the obvious pleasure of Prime Minister Menzies and Games organisers. The new stand was not only in place for the Games, but also ready for use by footy fans attending the 1956 final series, resulting in a record grand final attendance and the now familiar sight of spectators occupying the perimeter of the Oval. The Olympic symbol even appeared on the Collingwood run-through as the Demons and the Magpies entered the arena for the big clash. Grand final opponents for the 2nd year in a row. Melbourne and Collingwood had previously met in grand finals in 1926, just prior to the Magpies' remarkable run of 4 flags in a row. And in 1939, with the Demons again emerging as victors. Their rivalry gained fresh momentum in the mid to late 50s. The two dominant teams in the competition, with Melbourne destined to appear in 7 successive grand finals. In the 56 grand final, Melbourne used Bob Johnson as a ruckman and in attack, in tandem with decoy full forward Athol Webb. Both moves were successful, although Webb, number 15, slips on this occasion. Noel McMahon, another Demon to slip while in attack. Magpie number 36, Ken Turner, pursued by his opponent, Brian Dixon. Collingwood did well early, and this goal from an acute angle by rover Bill Jones lifted Magpie hopes. But these were short-lived. as the capacity crowd, including these brave spectators on top of the southern stand, watched the Demons take control. The Melbourne side, with pace to burn, careered away from the woods in the second half, winning by more than 12 goals. The rampaging Demons had a new grand final opponent in 1957, the first year of reserved seating for the finals following its success at the Olympics. Essendon had upset Melbourne in the second semi-final, but for the rematch, the Demons launched an all-out attack to nullify the Bombers' game plan. Melbourne rover Ian Ridley, dangerous around goals, kicked 3 off the ground. Essendon's Hugh Mitchell defends ineffectually on his left foot. Athol Webb gets the ball away from the pack to Ron Barassi, who charges off downfield in typical fashion. Barassi was unstoppable in this game. On this occasion, he dumps Mal Pascoe after the Essendon player has intercepted Bluey Adams' kick. It was 3 flags in a row for the Demons after another runaway victory, probably the best of their premiership hat-trick. Skipper John Beckwith savours the moment. By the late 50s, Melbourne was quite a different city. The Moomba Festival in its early years. This Moomba Queen from one of many post-war immigrant families, adding a new dimension to Melbourne's cultural life. Melbourne's first multi-storey office tower, the ICI building. A new addition to the public transport fleet, the Blue Harris train. And in 1959, the Myer Music Bowl was completed in the parkland between the Botanic Gardens and St Kilda Road. But some things hadn't changed. The Demons were still the power team of the VFL competition. Melbourne entered the 1959 Grand Final once more as favourites. The team still a potent blend of experienced finals campaigners, like Beckwith, Barassi, Adams and Lord, and talented newcomers like Hassaman. For 3 quarters, the pacey Essendon side took the game right up to the Demons. Bomber small men John Burt and Jack Clark were as elusive as ever. While teammates like David Shaw applied plenty of pressure as well. But the Demons held firm. Rover Bluey Adams breaks clear after a throw-in. At the other end, Taz Johnson outmarks his opponent Ron Evans. And Alec Epis can only watch in vain as a Bob Johnson kick sails through the big sticks. More joy for John Beckwith's team. Royal Show Week in Melbourne, the traditional lead-up to the grand final, the grand parade, the Ferris wheel, the finest livestock, the official party, familiar sights to show crowds, and a familiar end to the footy season, with Melbourne and Collingwood contesting the flag on a sodden MCG surface. Not that the conditions deterred the supporters of these 2 proud clubs, meeting in a grand final for the 4th time in 6 years, with Collingwood once again the underdog. But the Magpies' renowned battling qualities were not enough on this occasion. The Demons held them scoreless in the first term, setting the tone for the day. Melbourne's Keneally is flattened by hooker Harrison. Barassi comes in to remonstrate, and the umpires are quickly on the scene. But the Demons refuse to be sucked in by the Woods' vigour. Another of the Demon stars, Laurie Mithun, gets a kick away. Mithun again, taking a well-judged mark. Melbourne went right on with the job, recording a big win, and allowing Collingwood only 6 shots at goal for the entire game. If the Demons' power had started to wane, it certainly wasn't obvious on this wet final Saturday of the 1960 season. The only blemish on Melbourne's remarkable finals record came in 1958, the centenary year for Aussie rules, which included a light-hearted 40-a-side reenactment match at the MCG. In contrast, the 58 grand final was a grim affair, with a virtually unbackable Melbourne team steaming towards a fourth successive flag that would equal Collingwood's cherished record.
Tops this Sydney, a real football crowd. 98,000 at Melbourne Cricket Ground.
Despite the rain, the atmosphere at this stage is absolutely electric.
The game began in wet and sloppy conditions, but Melbourne still managed to skip away to a 3-goal break.
Across to Gabelich of Collingwood, and the kick is over towards Melbourne's Dixon.
Brian Dixon's kick into the forward line is marked by Thorold Merritt.
One of the finest players in the game, and in top form for Collingwood today. It's best man standing, and both sides
But
are
Bob
going
Johnson's
in harder.
pass finds Ian Ridley in the square.
Johnson again for the Demons. And Ridley marks his kick right in front. Melbourne's great coach Norm Smith is anxious, not happy.
And Ridley's goal brings applause from the Melbourne members.
And now you can watch closely as Melbourne's diminutive...
But in an amazing turnaround, the Magpies, with some well-applied vigour, upset their fancied rivals. Ian Ridley feels the sting of a rugged tackle by Bill Sarong.
Here now is a passage of play which inspired Collingwood at a very crucial stage.
A string of goals by the Woodsmen in the second quarter put them slightly in front at half-time. Rover Ken Bennett kicked two. And Mick Toomey scored from a free.
There's very little difference in the scores, and Collingwood now have bridged the gap.
Coach Kine told his players to maintain the pressure, and Collingwood did just that in the third quarter, harassing Demon stars Laurie Mithun and Ron Barassi in particular.
Gabelich, Merritt and Harrison look on. It was apparent that Collingwood were gaining the upper hand.
By three-quarter time, the Magpies had stitched up the result with a 5-goal to 2-point third term. An air of resignation in the Melbourne camp.
Amongst the Melbourne players in the last endeavour to win the premiership. His side in the frying pan is nearly in the fire. In the Magpie camp, Font Kine emphatically impresses the Collingwood player to hold Melbourne.
Compared to the Magpie huddle, where Font Kine, Gordon Hocking and Captain Murray Wiedemann all urged the players to make one final effort.
Murray Wiedemann has his say too. Hold on, says Font Kine. Well, the Magpies are confident.
Kine's team quelled any hopes of a final quarter Demon revival, despite this snap goal in the square by Compton.
And the difference is only 19 points with still time on to play. After it saves the Collingwood attack, he kicks it to the flank, but it's all over, and Collingwood wins the 1958 Grand
The Collingwood bench erupts as the final siren sounds, having pulled off one of the most remarkable and heroic premiership wins of all time, and as it transpired, preventing the Demons from a clean sweep of 6 successive flags.
The two coaches meet. Norm Smith disappointed, but a good loser.
This would be the Magpies' finest moment for more than 30 years. World War II had severely disrupted football, and it took several years for fans to adapt to a new era and to new heroes. Football in the immediate post-war years was looking for new stars, successors to 30s legends Gordon Coventry, Bob Pratt and Jack Regan, and Hayden Bunton. Bruce Andrew, the man responsible for most of the filming of these footy legends in action, continued his invaluable promotional work for the ANFC after the war. In 1951, he engaged top local cameraman Roy Driver to film leading players as they demonstrated the various skills of the game. The VFL careers of most of these players straddled both eras. South Melbourne ruckman Jack Graham had already finished playing in 1949. Andrew had filmed him as one of the last users of the place kick in 1937, repeating the big man's demonstration for the camera 14 years later. Melbourne great Jack Mueller had twice come out of retirement to assist the Demons finals campaigns. He booted 20 goals in 3 finals matches to help his team take out the 1948 flag, but couldn't repeat the magic in 1950. Carlton's brilliant fullback Ollie Grieve, runner-up in the 1948 Brownlow medal, and a glorious exponent of the drop, torpedo and punt kick. Grieve's teammate Jack Chuka Howell, one of the biggest and best players of his era. A brilliant high mark and fast for a big man, he could regularly send drop kicks 60 yards downfield. St Kilda's likely built centre man Harold Bray. Few could match him for courage, tenacity and skill. Brilliant centre half-back Bert Deacon won Carlton's first Brownlow medal in 1947. A superb mark, whose uncanny judgment often launched the Blues into attack. Footscray defender Marty McDonnell was another whose career was disrupted by the war, but he went on to represent Victoria 8 times. North Melbourne's dazzling centreman Les Foot was to his era what Baldock and Jesselenko were to theirs. A master of evasion, Foot later captain-coached St Kilda, where he picked up another Best and Fairest award. And Essendon's Bill Hutchison, one of the best and most decorated rovers in VFL history, and a key player in the mighty Bomber sides of the late 40s and early 50s. Bruce Andrew was more than happy to make use of Hutchie's sublime skills for his 1951 film. In the same year, Hutchie took over as Don Skipper from Dick Reynolds, who many old-timers still regard as the greatest player the game has seen. A freakish rover and triple Brownlow medalist, Reynolds also rewrote the Essendon record book. Club captain from 1939 to 1950, and coach from 1939 to 1960. Reynolds also established a then VFL record of 320 games, and more than any other player, his career truly embraced the pre-war and post-war eras. But as his on-field role was drawing to a close, another Bomber was set to become the league's first post-war superstar. John Coleman exploded onto the VFL scene in 1949 with a 12-goal debut, and became the only footballer in league history to kick 100 goals in his first season. The football public had always held a special regard for its top full forwards, and no one kicked goals better than Coleman. He captured the public's imagination like no other, with his acrobatic high flying, raw courage, and unerring accuracy. His tussles with the great fullbacks, like Ollie Grieve, were eagerly anticipated. Coleman also played a vital part in Essendon's grand final wins of 1949 and 50, and again topped the ton in 50 and 52. His controversial suspension on the eve of the 51 finals is said to have cost the Dons a third successive flag. His league career was cut tragically short in the 8th round of 1954, when he dislocated his knee so badly he was never able to play football again. But if Coleman was the game's most identifiable player of the 50s, most teams by then could boast of their own genuine champions. Geelong's Bernie Smith. Bob Woofer Davis. Collingwood's Lou Richards. Bobby Rose. North's Mickey Aylett and many others. Probably the ultimate football celebrities of the late 1950s were Footscray's Ted Witten and Melbourne's Ron Barassi. Idolised in the western suburbs, Witten was a rascal who could tough it out with the best of them. Above all, though, Witten was a magnificent all-round talent, with every skill in the book, and legitimate claims to the title, Mr. Football. Witten would go on to set a new league record of 321 games before his retirement as a player in 1970. Tenacity is the word most often associated with Ron Barassi's approach to football. Not blessed with natural skills, Barassi was a belligerent and explosive footballer who pushed himself to the point of exhaustion. He was totally team-oriented and had the knack of taking the desperate mark and playing on without any loss of momentum, a rare skill in his era. Whenever the Demons needed the extra lift, it was the famous number 31 who produced that match-winning goal, or desperate charge through a pack. Barassi found his niche at Melbourne when coach Norm Smith used him as an on-baller, the first true ruck rover. Above all, Barassi was an inspiration and a key figure in the Demons' resurgence and supremacy in the 50s. While Barassi and Witten gathered numerous individual and club awards during their fine careers, neither succeeded in taking out the VFL's highest individual honour, the Brownlow Medal. This is Melbourne's Ivor Warne-Smith, the game's first dual winner of the coveted award. He learned of his success by mail and had to collect his medal from VFL headquarters. Footscray's Alan Hopkins lost on a countback in 1930, but received a retrospective award from the VFL 59 years later. Hayden Bunton won 3 Brownlow medals in 7 seasons, and was also pipped by Dick Reynolds by 1 vote in 1934. A year earlier, his Fitzroy teammate, Chicken Smallhorn, became the first winner to be presented with his medal at the MCG. The next public ceremony did not occur until 1954, when Richmond's Roy Wright was invited to make an appearance on Grand Final Day to allow fans and the participating teams to acknowledge his achievement. From 1956, the medals were officially presented at the MCG on first semi-final day, and this practice continued for a further 15 years. A host of top-line players were honoured in this way, including St Kilda's Neil Roberts, who was congratulated by Butch Gale and John Brady. Carlton's prolific ball-getter John James does a lap of honour with opposing skippers Ted Witten and Neil Roberts, before receiving his medal from League President Sir Kenneth Luke. A lineup of previous Brownlow winners witnessed Alistair Lord's presentation. The dashing Geelong centreman received his medal from Sir Dallas Brooks. The second of 3 such presentations for South Rover Bob Skilton, and the first of 3 for another brilliant left-footer, Ian Stewart. The oldest Brownlow winner, at 31, Fitzroy's lion-hearted Kevin Murray. Peter Bedford received his Brownlow from Governor Sir Rowan Delacombe on second semi-final day, because he was in action in the first semi. The 10 non-participating captains were also in attendance. Since the introduction of the final 5 in 1972, all presentations have been made at various function centres on the night of the count. That year, Collingwood's Len Thompson pipped Melbourne's Greg Wells for the coveted award. Representing the state was another honour, which the top VFL players could anticipate. Before the introduction of State of Origin games, Victorian teams won 16 out of the 19 national football carnivals, held between 1908 and 1975. The supremacy of the Vics was especially evident in the 50s, when thrashings of other state teams were handed out as a matter of course. This championship final at Subiaco was no exception. From Roy Wright's opening knockout to Bill Gunn outmarking Polly Farmer. To Butch Gale's driving kick forward, to Ted Witten's tackle, to Ron Barassi's goal. The dominance of the Big V was total. The Centenary Carnival at the MCG began with an impressive opening ceremony. Fred Goldsmith was the Vic's flag bearer. Victorian skipper Davis meets the Prime Minister. The Vics met South Australia in the final and again came out on top. But on this occasion, fullback Harry Sullivan's kick is marked for the Crow Eaters by former Davis Cup tennis star Ken McGregor. The Vics did equally as well in the one-off interstate games. The 1959 team, including a host of stars, played WA in Melbourne. Big punch by Donaldson, opposed to Polly Farmer at the centre bounce. Graham Arthur's left footer in the direction of Ron Evans. Bob Skilton handballs to Bob Johnson. Farmer in turn feeds off to John Todd. A lovely pass to Evans, who goals. Barassi shovels the ball to Witten, who sets up Skilton. At the opposite end, Skilton collects and runs into the easiest of goals. Profiles of individual players in the post-war era were also being lifted off the field. Whether running clinics for enthusiastic kids, being interviewed by members of the football media, or being written about in the press, the top VFL footballers enjoyed celebrity status in Melbourne. Increasingly, cameras probe their pre-match preparations. Their post-match medical treatment. Or their relaxation activities. Even the shower room wasn't out of bounds. February 1954, and thousands of people line Melbourne streets to catch a glimpse of the young Queen and her husband, the first visit to Australia by a reigning monarch. Several days later, and the Melbourne Cricket Ground plays host to a massed school children's display for Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. The MCG staged another memorable event 6 months later, as Charlie Sutton's Bulldogs sought to become the first of the teams admitted in 1925 to win a VFL flag. Footscray had entered the league with a distinguished VFA record, but like the other new teams, struggled initially to make an impact at the higher level. The Bulldogs always had a nucleus of good players and reached the finals for the first time in 1938. But despite the contributions over the years of players like Jim Toms, Norman Ware, and Arthur Oliver, they failed to get past the first semi in their first 6 appearances until they finally broke through in 1953. Charlie Sutton was appointed captain coach in 1951 and took his team to a finals appearance in his first year. Footscray lost a close encounter to Essendon in this match, but Sutton had learned what was required to take the next step. By the time his players lined up against the Demons in the 1954 Grand Final, he knew they were ready. Shop early to avoid the rush was the metaphor he used, and the Bulldogs did just that. Key players Don Ross, Sutton, Duffy, Kerr and Peter Box, all in action in the opening minute. The Bulldogs were a team on a mission, and a 6-goal opening quarter put Melbourne down for the count. Their ace forward was Jack Collins. Ted Witten had nothing but praise for his teammate.
He was a magnificent footballer right through his career. He equalled the grand final record that year, kicking 7 goals, and a great player. Very, on his day, unbeatable, you know.
At the other end, Witten himself was part of a winning backline, which also included fullback Herb Henderson. And back pocket, Wally Donald. Stationed in a forward pocket in this game, Sutton was equally inspirational. But he nearly didn't make it to the ground after the steering column of his Holden broke on the way. Sutton blamed the potholes in the Altona roads for the mishap. Doug Reynolds' left-foot snap goal in the final quarter was the icing on the cake for the Bulldogs, who went on to double Melbourne's score. The first flag for the western suburbs was an intoxicating event, as Coach Sutton described it.
This is one of the most proudest days of my life, the day we came off the ground after winning the 54 premiership. Jack Collins and myself giving Jack a hug after that magnificent performance that he put on for us that day. We very elated. Naturally, the people of Footscray very elated.
Among the Footscray faithful, Sutton reserves a special embrace for one of his greatest admirers, his mother. Round 2, 1955. Footscray at home to Richmond, with Bulldog fans out in force again to witness their flag unfurling. The official party includes Footscray councillor Billy Hatfield and club president Otto Grobecker and his wife. Sutton missed this game, but hoped that this would be the first of many flags to fly over the Western Oval. But 1954 would remain the Bulldogs' sole VFL triumph. Footscray's only other real opportunity for premiership glory came in 1961. But on grand final day, they came up against an even more determined foe. Kennedy's Commandos, the mighty Hawks. A club which had been the surprise addition to league ranks in 1925 and had struggled near the foot of the ladder for more than 3 decades. Under new coach John Kennedy, the Hawthorn side of the early 1960s was ready to shed its loser's tag. A new emphasis on peak physical fitness, experiments with hard circuit training, and the adoption of a rugged run-on style of play helped the Hawks rise to the top. In ruckman turned forward John Peck and ruck-roving skipper Graham Arthur, the 61 Hawks also had the leaders to take them into battle. The Hawthorn side showed little sign of nerves in its first ever grand final. But it was the pacier Bulldogs, with their patented flick pass, and Witten and Hobbs combining well, who made the early running. But as they had done all season, the relentless Hawks simply wore the opposition to a standstill and had the game effectively won by three-quarter time. The undisputed star of Hawthorn's victory was centre-man and fitness fanatic Brendan Edwards, who gathered kicks at will for the entire game. The Hawks had secured their first premiership with a most convincing display of power football. A special moment for the Glenferrie faithful, who had endured so many lean times. 2 years later, Kennedy's team was warming up for its second tilt at a VFL flag, including future coach David Parkin, backman Stead Hay, and reserve Kevin Connell. The 63 Hawks had reached the grand final with the core of their first premiership side, and the same endeavour and fierce tackling which had overwhelmed lesser teams. As ever, the Hawks' application kept them in the contest for 3 quarters, before the talented Geelong team was finally able to open up play and slip away. Coach Kennedy stood down after that season, but was back at the helm again 4 years later, and ready to lift the training intensity even further. This new twice-weekly session at a training farm in Bulleen was likened to a commando course in the army. For the players, it was like a couple of hours spent in hell. Under Kennedy and his successors, the Hawks would become the most successful VFL club over the next 2 decades. Unlike Hawthorn and Footscray, St Kilda was a Foundation League member and had always attracted a strong following. Its first appearance in a grand final came in 1913, a tight encounter which it lost narrowly to Fitzroy. After this near miss, the Saints would have to wait more than 50 years for its next assault on the flag. The 1939 side, under Ansel Clark, excited Saints fans by beating Richmond in the first semi. But Collingwood dashed their hopes in the preliminary final 2 weeks later. Their team always had its share of champion players, but overall, St Kilda Barrackers probably experienced more long and lean winters than any other supporter group. The Saints also lost the first semi in 1963, but remained optimistic, having unearthed several potential stars in the one season, including blonde bombshell Carl Dittrich, who made a huge impact in his first VFL game. In a neat piece of irony, spectators at this game also saw future AFL boss Ross Oakley effectively coat-hangered by future MLA and anti-merger advocate Brian Dixon. In 1965, the Saints moved to Moorabbin, situated in Melbourne's Sandbelt region, and opposition coaches were wary of the new surface and of the rising level of talent being assembled in the red, white and black. St Kilda played the new ground to perfection, and revolving around the chemistry generated between Ian Stewart and Darryl Baldock, headed the league ladder for the first time ever. The 1965 Grand Final, a lap of honour for the Aussie tennis champ Margaret Smith. And the Saints in their first Grand Final since 1913. Opposed to the equally talented Bombers. The early signs were promising. When Verdon Howell, at full forward, threaded this goal through, the Saints were still very much in contention for their first flag. But Essendon put the St Kilda defence under enormous pressure in the second half. And with outstanding contributions from the unfashionable duo, Brian Sampson And Ted Fordham, the Dons careered away to a comfortable win. Premiership dreams had to be put on hold yet again. But only for 12 months this time. The Saints won their first 8 games in 1966, and despite injuries, form reversals and suspensions, eventually qualified for another crack at the flag. And the ever-hopeful fans queued for tickets in anticipation. Grand Final day, and a huge air of excitement as the St Kilda side made its way down the MCG race and onto the arena. From the opening bounce, the match had all the elements of a classic thriller, with both the Saints and Magpies keen to atone for previous grand final disappointments. So fierce was the contest that even this goal umpire became a casualty of an unintentional Sierakowski shirt front. And despite the jumper confusion, this time the cup really did belong to St Kilda. An especially sweet moment for coach Alan Jeans. The Saints had sneaked home by a solitary point, and the din from the victors' rooms told its own story. Despite some stirring performances in the following years, particularly in the early 70s, nothing the Saints have done since has succeeded in matching the thrill of its first premiership triumph. North Melbourne was the last of the new VFL teams to win a premiership, but the first of the 3 to reach a grand final. Steady improvement after the war enabled North to rise up the ladder. Under new coach Wally Carter, the team finished on top for the first time in 1949, only to lose close finals to Carlton and Essendon. Carter had the gifted Les Foote as captain, and a backline headed by McCorkle, Jarrett and Reeves, considered to be the toughest in the league. In front of goal, the team had Jock Spencer, one of the competition's best spearheads. Against the revitalised Essendon side in the 49 preliminary final, North fought bravely. But the tight game swung Essendon's way when Spencer was penalised for interfering with McClure after marking strongly in the goal square. North players were dumbfounded, but the Bombers kept their cool and took the match. North, now known as the Kangaroos, rebounded well the following season to reach its first grand final, and was given a realistic chance against the all-conquering Bombers. North survived an opening blitz by the Dons to set up some good moves of its own. Foote and Dynan combining to set up this mark, and goal by Bob Brooker. At half-time, the Kangaroos trailed by 13 points, and at three-quarter time were still in with a chance. In the huddle, Les Foote, John Reeves, Kevin Dynan behind him, and Bob Brooker. Foote's creative handball to Dodger Ryan to set up another forward move through Frank Jeeves in the third quarter was typical. But not enough in the end, and the captain left the arena that day a disappointed man. North had hopes of making its second grand final appearance in 1958. But apart from a late flurry of goals in the last quarter of the preliminary final, the Kangaroos were no match for a determined Collingwood side.
40 yards out, Aylett kicks a torpedo. Two is Waddington, both of North Melbourne. The bounce-up is still in the centre of the ground.
Players like Captain John Brady, Mickey Aylett, John Waddington and Albert Mantello fought it out to the end, but they had left their run too late.
Within 30 yards of the goal, Aylett. Good shot here, and a
Strengthened by interstate and local recruiting, the Roos eventually won through to their second ever grand final in 1974, but came up against raging hot favourites Richmond.
Dashing rover Paul Sproul switched into the centre, threatens more danger, but his pass, intended for Kevin Sheedy, is swooped on by Brownlow medalist Keith Gregg.
The Roos tried very hard through the efforts of players like Keith Gregg and Wayne Schimmelbusch, but the Tiger defence held firm.
But Richmond's reliable back pocket, Mervyn Keane, foils the attack. Giving them their 9th premiership, and they're the first.
Tom Hafey's Richmond was without doubt the dominant team of his era, winning 4 flags in the space of 8 seasons. The biggest Australian news story the following year took place in Canberra, the sacking of the Labor Prime Minister Gough Whitlam by the Governor-General Sir John Kerr.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
Several weeks earlier, North Melbourne had again clawed its way into a grand final, looking to dismiss a strong Hawk challenge.
In which they're opposed to sentimental favourites, North Melbourne, in quest of their first pennant. The only previous occasion they've contested the flag was against Essendon 25 years ago. Since 1973, they've been...
North coach Ron Barassi certainly looked confident.
North Melbourne's pace and the same type of determination that brought them victory over Richmond in the preliminary final.
From the outset, North's little men, Keith Gregg, John Burns and Barry Cable were prominent, setting up Captain Barry Davis and other Roo forwards with scoring opportunities.
Giant ruckman Nolan sends
the Roos clearly outpaced Hawthorn in the last half and seemed to have perfected the fast play-on game Barassi had helped develop as Carlton's coach. North bolted away to finally parcel up its first flag by almost 10 goals and provide another notch for Barassi's belt.
75.
Two years later, the Roos would secure their second premiership by defeating Collingwood in a replayed grand final after surviving a thrilling draw a week earlier. Grand Final Day, September 1939. A familiar sight. The Wellington Parade tram disgorging its passengers at Jollymont. 10 years later, the pictures are in colour, but the view is the same. The one constant in a sea of change, the die-hard footy fan, hurrying to the most important game of the season, past the footy record sellers, through the car park, reaching the perimeter of the MCG, possibly a knot or two in the stomach. And finally, through the turnstiles. Fair weather or foul, the supporters would make the necessary adjustments and sit tight till their team appeared. Before the introduction of reserve seating in 1957, the early bird secured the prime viewing positions. And got to decorate the pickets in club colours and insignia as well. On match days, and especially at finals time, the role of the formal cheer squads also became more pronounced in the 50s and 60s. Note the young fan who loses his boater in the excitement of holding the team run-through before the 65 grand final. Passionate Saints supporter Ian Molly Meldrum. Age has never been a barrier to developing a club allegiance. Every season, knitting mills churned out new garments by the thousands for young fans to wear. Some were happy just to be seen in the beanie or jumper. Others would add the number of their favourite player. Those who could afford the real thing would buy a full-size football for a kick after the game. For others, a paper footy in the park was a good enough excuse for stacks on the mill. Adult supporters expressed their affiliations in other ways. Taking out a club membership was a time-honoured custom for many. Or you could go the whole hog and show the club colours in your shop window. Or by slightly more subtle display methods. It was also possible at times to explain the colour schemes of certain buildings by their location. During finals campaigns, often it seemed that entire communities could be infected by footy fever. And if the only out-of-town team in the competition made it through to the grand final, the city of Melbourne could expect nothing less than an invasion on the big day. But not every team made the finals, and in any case, the big games at the MCG were merely the culmination of a season's footy.
Well, you want to go this one here or go through the round?
There were 6 matches on Saturday, and you went where your team went to watch them play.
Where you going there? No, I've got to wait. You know, Alan, then you?
For many supporters, the suburban grounds represented the true heartland of Victorian footy. Journeys into enemy territory, to Victoria Park or Brunswick Street, to the Junction Oval or Windy Hill, were as much a part of football culture as the games themselves. These grounds were often muddy, sometimes for weeks on end.
Can they be Collingwood fans? Yep.
Time on Brian, well, any moment, I would say. Guys kicked,
but the similarities of the grounds were less noticeable than their differences. Glen Ferry had its trains. Arden Street had the gasometer. At Punt Road, the spectators always seemed to be pressing in on the tiny ground, with its strange off-centre goalposts.
Richmond the winners, 11 goals, 17.
In the 1960s, the introduction of new lightweight camera gear enabled Melbourne-based filmmakers like Rod Kinnear to capture in sharp detail crowd rituals at these suburban grounds. And the availability of more portable sound equipment meant that for the first time, the lively contribution of the individual barracker could also be recorded.
How's that? Oh! About time you get Collingwood a go, you mutt! Go on, Hibbert! Go on, Hibbert! Nice! Hooray! Yeah! Go on, you Graham! You beauty! About time you got one! You won't put it through? Of course he will! No! What? 35 yards! I've seen him miss it.
All footy fans can relate to the anguish of the miss from point-blank range.
Oh, what are you doing, you mutt? God, where the bloody hell did he mark it from? Right in the goal, yeah. Take that one. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? Oh, run. I tell you. He took it God, he's bad, ain't he? Gotta go back overseas again.
The indignation generated by the crude or unfair tackle. Or the sheer joy of witnessing the star full forward do his stuff. Club loyalty and a sense of place, of belonging to the local tribe, were the twin rocks on which VFL football was built. But when St Kilda opted to move to Moorabbin in the 60s, and other clubs began to look around, suddenly it seemed as if the ground was literally shifting beneath the supporters' feet. Within a few years, the heartlands of a number of clubs had been displaced. On match days, their former home grounds remained empty and silent. September 1956. Television comes to Australia and is quickly embraced. 126,000 sets are made in this country in the first year of transmission. The cheapest set cost £189 at a time when the average weekly wage is just over £17. 10 years later, only one household in 10 doesn't own a set. Television was introduced to coincide with the 1956 Olympics, the Melbourne Games beginning the transformation of the Olympics into a TV event. It was also the beginning of a special relationship for those Melburnians with access to live telecast of the Games for 8, 10, 12 hours a day on a choice of channels. No other event in the 50s did more to focus attention on Melbourne. The city and Games venues were suddenly inundated with international visitors. And newspaper vendors did brisk business, as locals sought to catch up on the latest results. But it was the new medium of television which increasingly attracted the public gaze. TV, it was argued, might have been invented specially for sport. City stores with sets in their windows knew they were on a winner, beaming out live pictures of the Olympics in flickering black and white. The VFL's first flirtation with television came via a telecast of a demonstration game at the Olympics and closed-circuit telecasts of the 1956 final series. Given Melbourne's love affair with the footy, it surprised no one that from the beginning of the 1957 season, the league allowed live telecasts of the last quarters of matches by all three channels then in operation. This sequence is from the earliest known surviving VFL telecast, the match between Collingwood and South Melbourne at Victoria Park, Round 4, 1957. The sole commentator is former Australian Test captain and later MCC Secretary Ian Johnson. Channel 9's first appointee in this role. The doyen of Melbourne sports directors, Alf Potter of HSV7, is generally acknowledged as having developed the visual style for covering Aussie rules. Following the game as a spectator might, watching the ball, anticipating the play, using close-ups for dramatic impact, and seeking at all times to get the viewer involved. Yet Potter, who has directed more TV football than anyone else, was told initially that the game defied telecasting.
Because the ground was too big, the rules of the game, there was no offside, and the ball could be passed any way. It could be hand passed, it could be kicked, it could be rolled along, and it could go in any direction.
But the technical assurance and popularity of the early telecasts soon dispelled such notions, and the league became increasingly wary of the effects of TV. Dips in match attendances over 3 consecutive years convinced the VFL to abandon live last quarters in 1961. And in 1962, the present system of replays was instituted. Meanwhile, the sporadic film coverage of the game via the newsreels continued, much as it had before the arrival of television. And just occasionally, amateur cinematographers would capture different aspects of the game altogether, like these candid pictures of the Essendon and Carlton teams preparing for their 1962 finals campaign. Charlie Payne and Bluey Shelton, Ken Fraser, Bomber coach Coleman, and Terry Rogers. Brian Sampson, skipper Jack Clark, Blues coach Ken Hands, John Nichols, John Bonetti and John James, Bob Crow, Murray Kick and Peter Barry, Sergio Silvani and Graham Donaldson. But it was the professional camera crews, for the most part, who continued to record footy's big moments.
Richmond 8 goals, 12, 60 points.
Increasingly, though, the greater airtime devoted to football on television had to affect other types of coverage.
And now Richmond will have to come back with one there because there's only 5 points the difference. It was good football by
the Movietone Company sought to extend its football links in the 60s by preparing specially edited film versions of the grand finals in association with Rothmans, and drawing attention to this arrangement through its own newsreels. Here, League President Sir Kenneth Luke receives a presentation copy of Movietone's coverage of the '63 grand final. Another copy goes to Bruce Andrew for the ANFC. And rival captains Fred Waller and Graham Arthur receive prints as well. Apart from the game highlights, the Rothmans' 1963 film included other priceless moments. An accordionist in the Geelong rooms pre-match. Good luck telegrams for the players. And TV host Happy Hammond and feline companion running out with the players. Rothman's next grand final film was produced in CinemaScope, allowing cinema patrons to experience on the big screen all the memorable moments of the '64 encounter.
102,000 spectators packed the Melbourne cricket ground.
Waters gets the Magpies going again. Tottenham twists clear of the defence and passes to Gabelick, who's unmarked, as he streaks away into an open goal.
Such as Ray Gabelick's 70-yard run to goal in the final quarter.
It's desperate football as Dixon marks. His kick comes off the pack to Crompton right up from the back pocket.
And Neil Crompton's winning snap a few minutes later.
The Demons are back in the lead. And it's through the middle. Ken Fraser receives the VFL Premiership Cup.
The black and white film coverage continued in the following years, until Rothmans sought to further differentiate their product from the TV replays by filming in colour. While other footy stories on film endeavoured to provide some context for big match action.
Australian rules, high kicking, fast moving.
This sequence, featuring Richmond and Geelong players at training, is part of an Australian diary segment compiled by the Commonwealth Film Unit.
Ability is vital, accurate kicking the key to success.
It looks at the build-up to the 1967 Grand Final, before including highlights of the game itself. But although technically superior, increasingly football coverage on film could not hope to compete with television in terms of immediacy.
Potter has it, he can't break clear. It's taken by Green. That's a point. That's a point.
The grand final replays of the 1960s, broadcast almost as soon as the game was over, generated great excitement among home viewers.
Hits the boundary line. 28 and a half gone. There's Murray's kick to the wing position.
Images and sound from some of the great grand finals of this era are now a firm part of footy folklore. By this time, the people of Melbourne also had many more choices as to how to spend their leisure hours. In 1969, for example, they turned out en masse to see hometown heroes, the Seekers, perform at the Myer Music Bowl. With an estimated attendance of around 200,000, this was believed to be the biggest crowd ever to watch a concert in Australia. Not that football was losing its appeal. The highest attendance figure at a VFL Grand Final, unlikely to be surpassed, was achieved the following year. On that day, more than 120,000 fans squeezed into the MCG to witness one of the most remarkable of all finals games. And again, the Channel 7 cameras and crew caught every heart-stopping moment, consummating for any remaining sceptics the alliance between Melbourne's favourite game and the new medium. Apart from the replays and specialist football programs, television also provided opportunities for VFL players to gain greater exposure through product endorsement. Early examples of testimonial advertising, by comparison with the aggressive marketing of later years, appear quite spontaneous, and probably were. Here, Hawthorn's 1961 Premiership wingman, John Fisher, espouses the virtues of Australia's own car to the man with the roving mic, Tony Charlton, in the car park at Glen Ferry.
Well, I think they've got everything. They're economical. I think they get value for your money. And my father's always had them, so I thought I'd drive them too.
And next time you get a car, you'll have a Holden again.
I'll have a Holden again, Tony.
Good luck to you in there today.
Good, thanks very much.
John Fisher, Hawthorn's wing.
A slightly more rousing approach was adopted by the 4 and 20 Pie Company to extend the already strong connection between meat pies and football. To most TV viewers, these bus passengers in outer Vermont needed no introduction.
The rich golden pastry. Hoi! Hoi! Don't forget 'em, 4 and 20. Hoi! Hoi! Our lovely pie, me boys, the 4 and 20 pie. Hoi!
Alcoa Cat.
Because Alcoa aluminium has already become the big roof of today.
And television was not only a forum for the players. In the late 60s, Alcoa sought to promote its aluminium covering by advertising its roofing contract at the VFL's giant new sports stadium, then under construction.
Alcoa has the imagination. The Victorian
This auditorium was designed to seat 166,000 patrons in relative comfort in the unlikely event of rain. In the event, the league's showpiece at Waverley didn't ever achieve its intended capacity, but it did get the rain.
But we're not going in hard enough.
Swing back into attack once again. On the last defense line.
Despite the impact of television on the game, a number of films on football were produced in the 1970s. This slickly edited segment is from a Commonwealth government-produced film designed to introduce the game to the uninitiated, both locally and overseas. Viewers of this film would also have been exposed to the highlights of one of the great grand finals of the 70s.
Once again, loses the run of the ball. It bounces off hands to Gallagher, who's been most prominent in play. He takes 2 bounces, runs his full measure of distance.
Prior to this, the newsreels had been on hand at the MCG on the 5th of April 1970 to record a right royal display by Fitzroy against Richmond in the first ever VFL Sunday match. Movietone's coverage was in regulation black and white, while the Cinesound Review prepared a special colour edition to mark the visit by the royal family.
And in Melbourne, one of the first engagements is at the MCG to watch an Australian rules match between the 1969 Premiers Richmond and Fitzroy.
In meeting the players at half-time, Princess Anne reputedly asked Tiger Billy Barrett whether she was likely to see any punch-ups.
There's a goal coming up, but it makes no difference.
But the days of the newsreels were numbered. Movietone and Cinesound combined forces in October 1970 to produce the Australian Movie Magazine, in the hope of appealing to a new generation of filmgoers. One of its first stories, the Westgate Bridge disaster, highlighted how difficult this would prove. By the time these images reached the cinemas, they were already familiar to countless TV viewers across Australia.
Portable medical equipment is brought from Royal Melbourne Hospital. Within hours of the disaster, Victorian Premier Balti announces that a royal commission will inquire into the tragedy, one that shocks the nation.
But the movie magazine pressed on, continuing its coverage of grand finals and the occasional general interest football story, such as John Nicholls' achievement in establishing what was then the highest VFL games record in a 1974 match at Victoria Park.
Number ever played by one man in Premiership football in Victoria. The fans let the popular Carlton captain-coach know their feelings.
The Collingwood players, for their part, gave Big Nick a customary welcome.
Since John Nicholls started playing Premiership rules in 1957, he's amassed a total of 293 goals. Winner of countless...
The curtain finally descended on the Australian Movie Magazine on November 27, 1975, bringing to a close something like 70 years of continuous local newsreel production. Fittingly, the final reel consisted of a nostalgic tribute to Australian sportsmen and women over the years.
3 times in succession. The Latvian-born Conrad kids, Ilsa and John, and their coach Don Talbot, a dominant trio of the early 60s. But in 1971, she met brilliant opposition from Yvonne Gulagov. Not only did Yvonne defeat Margaret in straight sets...
If it needed one, the final blow for the Australian Movie Magazine was the arrival of colour television, the coming of which the newsreel itself had signalled in a 1974 edition.
Since 1956, Australians have watched television only in black and white. But C-Day, C for Colour Day, is fast approaching. the day of the first regular colour TV transmission. No longer will television be black and white. The world will come to life in natural colour.
Budget strictures confined the newsreel's coverage of its final VFL match to black and white. Channel 7 was busy celebrating its first transmission of a league grand final in colour.
He's given a hand pass back to Shimmerbush, a snap for goal.
The skill demonstration films of the late 60s and 70s, now sponsored by Australia's leading banks, were also produced in colour. Like the earlier black and white films produced under Bruce Andrews' guidance, these more recent examples also provide valuable and lasting records as some of the game's best practitioners of their era. Carlton big man John Nichols executing a normal punt kick. Geelong full forward Doug Wade, one of the great exponents of the torpedo punt. Collingwood spearhead Peter McKenna, a prolific goal kicker, using the drop punt for both accuracy and distance. Courageous forward Bob Keddy, a star in Hawthorn's 1971 flag win. Speedy Geelong rover Bill Goggin, a master of evasion. Carlton's Alex Jesaulenko, in unfamiliar jumper, superb overhead. And equally strong in grabbing chest marks. Footscray wingman Ian Bryant, a regular and successful entrant in television kicking contests. No place, kick or flick pass examples in this film, but one of the last demonstrations of a dying art, the sublime stab kick. By the time another coaching film appeared, Alan Aylett had become VFL and National Football League president. The first live telecast of a grand final had already gone to air.
Well, the pressure on this veteran from Collingwood, played over 200 games, fires for the goals.
And another group of stars was ready to display its talents for the camera and posterity. Hawthorn great Peter Knights. A spectacular high mark and inspiration to teammates and photographers alike. North Melbourne dynamo Barry Cable, a wonderfully skilled player with superb disposal by hand or foot. Brownlow medalist Graham Moss, a top ruckman from Claremont, who quickly became an outstanding player for the Dons, and was surely one of the last VFL stars to demonstrate a drop kick on film. Rugged Richmond centreman come defender Kevin Sheedy, whose sharp football mind made him a natural for coaching once he hung up his boots. And South Australian legend Russell Evert, who played only one season for North in the twilight of a glittering interstate career. Apart from demonstrating the skills of the game on film, these players and others could anticipate far greater media exposure than any of their predecessors in VFL ranks had experienced. Even in the 60s, champions like Geelong's Polly Farmer might only be filmed at training.
Well, I'd like to get with the club.
Or having to contend with the odd media interview.
And yet it has a chance of getting into the four. I'd like to get with a club that I think I could be of use to, rather than be with a club that's been on top. And that's the type of club that I'm looking for. I haven't picked anyone in particular, but a club that may be battling. And,
but by the 80s, established football identities sometimes had an entire program devoted to them, in which even the Prime Minister could be enticed to join the lineup of those eager to acknowledge the feats of a genuine superstar.
I'm delighted to be part of a program that pays tribute to you and to your achievements. Tonight, you're honoured by friends, family, fellow footballers and fans. And I'm still a fan, even though you're now committed to lifting St Kilda. You've demonstrated great personal qualities, on the field and off. You've worked hard to reach your goals. Yours is an example for young Australians to follow if they wish to make their mark in whatever field they choose. My very warmest best wishes tonight to you, Alec, and to your wife, Anne.
I think we've been playing our football.
Film tributes could take many forms. In 1979, Film Australia produced a warts-and-all study of Ron Barassi, at that time chasing his third premiership as coach of North Melbourne.
We've been wanting to win without all that. And I think we may become a bit like modern society, a bit bloody soft and spoiled.
And a revealing look at VFL club culture through the eyes of rookie player Kevin Bright, the prize recruit from East Perth.
Okay, another one. Come on, into the camera. Nice and easy.
The film's title, War Without Weapons.
Good. Really spring, recover. Good, come on your feet.
The director, Curtis Levy, a long-time Aussie rules fan, wanted to show the levels of commitment and intensity, both mental and physical, required by players to succeed at the top level.
Keep it up. Don't lay there, you'll get speared. Right over. Good. 3 more.
Levy had at his disposal a production crew, including top cinematographers Jeff Burton and Academy Award winner Dean Samler, and renowned feature film editor David Stiven. He chose to film North ahead of other clubs because of its outstanding record in the mid to late 70s, and because of the charisma and expectation of success which Barassi brought to his coaching. Players who fell short of this expectation in match situations are never left guessing as to how the coach felt about their performance.
That's bloody right! Darryl, you are a I'll tell you why. You've got the bloody football game beaten. You've come down here not concentrated. The ball goes out towards the Carlton small man. You stay back with your man. You could have got to the Carlton small man, but I know I'm going to protect myself. I don't mind a bloke going bad, Darryl, but to me, it's probably because you're bloody not switched on properly. Now you get over and try and mind the bloody forward pocket, okay? Stephen, you go to centre-half back, and you go to full-back. You weren't anywhere near that bloke.
Not surprisingly, Levy's film has captured as well as any the atmosphere and emotion of a big game. his crew enjoyed full cooperation from North in assembling their film. And their only disappointment may have been that it wasn't seen by more people at the time or since.
We've got to have blokes who do as they're bloody told.
No such problem faced Channel 7. As the principal footy telecaster, its VFL coverage played to a mass audience, and network promotions of the game grew more sophisticated each season. Arguably, its best remembered campaign combined a series of great action moments with the closest thing to an anthem the modern era has produced, Mike Brady's Up There Kazabi. Looking great. Australian feature films with football themes were also prominent during this period. Peter Weir's anti-war tale, Gallipoli, traded on interstate rivalries by depicting a match between West Australian and Victorian Army recruits in the shadows of the pyramids at an Australian infantry training camp. Playwright and lifetime Magpie supporter David Williamson wrote the script and allowed himself to be cast as the Vic's match-winning ruckman, and as such, a prime target for some dubious tactics by the opposition. Obviously, no melee rule in Cairo in 1915. Williamson had also written The Club, a witty, intelligent play about footy club loyalties under profound stress, which was adapted for the screen by Bruce Beresford in 1980.
11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Jack Thompson features as Coach Laurie Holden.
Two groups, 20 metres apart.
And John Howard plays Jeff Hayward, the high-priced, pot-smoking Tasmanian recruit on whose shoulders much of the club's ailing fortunes rest.
I hope he's insured.
As well as the solid welcome at training from Rene King, young Jeff clashes repeatedly with the coach, who places great store in the club's tradition and values.
All right. If you really want to know what's going on is that I'm sick to death of football and I couldn't care less whether I never play another game in my life. It's a load of macho competitive bullshit. You chase a lump of pigskin around a muddy ground as if your life depended on it, and when you finally get it, you kick it to buggery and then go chasing it again. Football shits me. Well, I wish to Christ you'd told us that before we paid out $120,000 for you. If you think you can buy me like a lump of meat, then you better think again. You push me too far, Jeff. I love this club. And I love football. And I will not tolerate anyone who holds them both in contempt.
Yes, well, they're within 4 points now, Lou. They've come right up again.
How it goes now, we see Wilson spinning away from the pack. It's a delightful hand pass. Down there out to his teammate Brown. And Brown gets the ball as he makes a long run around that wing position.
Much of Williamson's play revolves around boardroom shuffles, but Beresford has opened out the play to include actual game footage. intercut with dummy sequences featuring both his fictional players and his Magpie extras. The football insert material was arranged by then Collingwood coach Tom Hafey. In such a world, all things are possible, apart from Gary Ayres' crude tackle on Dennis Banks.
Typical of Rostov's coaching, brute force and stupidity. Edwards coming across to have a bit of a go. They're going out Ayres there now. Collingwood, Cameron top. That'll be a penalty free kick down the ground.
In this passage, Hawthorn's Ian Payton kicks goalward. Craig Stewart spoils Don Scott's attempt to mark.
Coming across now to pick it up as Doss. He's moving very well. A nice hand pass coming out.
Norm Doss handballs to Alan Goad, who goals at Princess Park, just as hundreds of fans invade the ground at Victoria Park after the final siren.
Now this is the ultimate in football. Hey, you can achieve miracles in this world if you bloody want to. If you want to enough. Now this is not beyond the stage of wanting. This is something that we have to do. Because if we don't, we won't be able to live with ourselves. We have to win. Hey, there are no prizes for second place.
In the end, Williamson's fictional club triumphs over the forces of human greed and opportunism, but only with the recognition that the game was changing, and not without cost to players and fans alike. Another Aussie film had covered similar territory 6 years earlier. The Great Mccarthy was adapted for the screen by Melbourne writer John Romerall from Barry Oakley's novel about a country football hero kidnapped by South Melbourne and made a star player in the city. Director David Baker cast John Jarrett as the youthful McCarthy and was fortunate to find at South Melbourne a handy look-alike in Gary Scott to double for Jarrett in the football sequences. Ironically, Scott didn't play a senior game in 1974, suggesting that all his action has been inserted from reserves games. Making McCarthy's on-field exploits look convincing was always going to be a difficult assignment. But Baker's camera operators, Gail Tattersall and Keith Wagstaff, and director of photography, Bruce McNaughton, did succeed in capturing some solid action from several games at the Lake Oval. This passage features Footscray's Terry Wheeler doing some heavy work in the packs. This was Wheeler's 5th game for the Bulldogs, but only his 2nd full match. Greg Lambert handballing to future coach Ricky Quaid. Future Swans captain Barry Round contesting with Barry Beecroft. A nice mark to Stuart Gull. And Colin Dell penalised for his tackle on Gary Bryce. Possibly the film's greatest claim to fame lay in its unwitting preview of things to come. The powerful South Melbourne club struggling for success on and off the field. The Swans helicopter arriving in the night sky like an alien spacecraft. and someone with shoulder-length blonde locks wearing the number 39 Guernsey. In truth, South Melbourne, one of the league's founding clubs, could have done with a few Great Mccarthys in the 70s. South hadn't won a flag since 1933, had played in only 2 final series, and now faced desperate financial problems and a dwindling local support base. When League President Alan Aylett and others in VFL management again flirted with the idea of basing a club in Sydney, administrators at South were more than ready to listen.
Australian football will succeed at top level in Sydney.
What effect will Australian rules have on rugby, soccer, other codes?
I haven't thought that one right through, and we're not interested at this stage.
Trying to invade Sydney was nothing new. The league had shown its missionary zeal as far back as 1903 in playing games for premiership points in the harbour city. In addition, several exhibition matches had been staged over the years at the SCG, including this Essendon-Geelong encounter in 1967. The following year, a St Kilda-Carlton promotional match at the SCG drew a crowd of over 22,000. On the adjacent sports ground, the Rugby League match of the day attracted only 14,000. Heartening figures for VFL officials. South Melbourne had also played in an exhibition match in Sydney during the 60s. And was scheduled to meet Collingwood in another experimental match at the SCG in 1981. South had had its moments on the field in the intervening period, but was by this time floundering in a sea of red ink that threatened to drown it. When the club's directors sought to play all its home games in Sydney in 1982, South supporters reacted with a ferocity to match their anguish. Battle lines were drawn, and a Keep South at South movement was formed as supporters vowed to fight forever to keep the club in Melbourne.
That will retard in any way.
The KSAS group eventually won control of the club, but couldn't overturn the VFL's decision regarding Swans home games in '82, nor the resolution of senior players who'd supported the shift. The feuding continued, but the die was cast. Threats of striking players were averted. Ricky Quaid appointed coach, and the Swans migrated north, not temporarily, but permanently. Officially, the club was still South Melbourne, but everyone would now know them as the Sydney Swans. On February 24, 1982, the relocated club was launched in lavish fashion at the Sydney Opera House and at a harbourside party. Bob Hawke was presented with his #1 ticket. After all the hoopla, the Swans got down to the business of preparing for their first game at their new home. March 28, 1982. 15,000 fans make their way into the SCG to witness the making of football history. The first tiny cornerstone of the national competition. and the beginning of the end of the suburban game, which had obsessed footy fans for generations. For the dispossessed South supporters, the club's first grand final victory back in 1909 must have seemed like an awfully long time ago.